guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a brand new style of video called What I'm Craving and How I'm Saving. If that sounds like something you're interested in, stick with me. We're going to get into it right now. So, my goal is to take a palette that I have seen online and that I am craving and save money by duping it out in my own collection. I'm sure you've seen tons of videos like this before, but I thought I would take a palette that looked a little bit challenging, that I'm super interested in buying, and go ahead and try to dupe it out in my collection. Now, this does not mean that this palette is not worth the price, that it's not good quality. It just happens to be a palette that I'm super interested in at a time where I'm trying to be a little bit more cautious with my spending. So the palette we're going to be duping out is right here. This is the Pinky Rose Exotic Peacock palette, and it retails for $24.99. Pinky Rose is an indie cosmetics brand. I have never actually tried them before, but a couple of the people that I watch on a regular basis on YouTube seem to really like their shadows. I am definitely interested in it, and I may eventually end up picking this palette up, but for right now I'm going to see what I can do in my own collection. So I'm going to go ahead and insert the swatches here. Now, these swatches are the colors that I've picked out in my own collection, and what I'm going to do is go through one by one and talk about the shades that I picked out and let you know if I think they're exact dupes or near dupes, or if there's anything a little bit different about them. Okay, so I'm going to go from the top left to the bottom right, and the first color that I wanted to dupe out was the color Wings, and that is sort of a frosty pinky white color. The palette that I thought best represented that shade is the Juvia's Place Deuce palette, and it's this shade right here, Puffs. It's definitely a little bit more pinky, and I would say it has a little bit more of a brightness to the reflection than the original palette swatches that I've seen. Again, I don't own that palette, so I'm just going off some of the swatches that I found online, but I do think it's pretty similar, and on the eye I'm not sure that you would tell a difference. Okay, then we've got a couple of shades from Juvia's Zulu. Obviously I pulled a lot from Juvia's because the palette that we're trying to dupe out here is very vibrant shades, and Juvia's Place is really well known for doing those vibrant colors. So the next one that I pulled out was from the Zulu palette, and it replaces the shade Peacock. So I chose this shade right here, which is not named, but this shade right here is kind of a frosty, minty, aqua kind of color. I think it's a little bit less vibrant than the one in the palette from Pinky Rose, but I do think it's really pretty, and I think in combination with the other colors it will work just fine. So the next one is Honey, and that also is being pulled from Zulu. So I pulled this shade right here to represent the honey shade. It's kind of like that mid-tone poopy kind of brown color, and this palette I think works almost identically to what's on the swatches for the Pinky Rose palette. The next color is sort of like a deeper cobalt blue, and this one I had a little bit of trouble coming up with in my collection, but what I ended up choosing was the Dose of Colors Snow Angels palette. I think this shade is a little bit lighter than the one in the Pinky Rose shade, in the Pinky Rose palette. I think this shade is a little bit lighter than the one in the Pinky Rose palette, but I do think that it comes across with enough depth to make the color pretty much equal. Okay, the next shade is from the Ruby May Purple Kush palette. If you've not picked this palette up, it's definitely worth a look if you like purples and are willing to experiment with some of these like funky green shades. Like, this is a nice palette. I've been very happy with all the looks that I've done with it. But anyway, the shade Tease I think is adequately duped out with this shade Swisher. I think if it were like a tinge deeper, the Swisher shade, if it were a tinge deeper, it would be a closer dupe to the one in the Peacock palette, the Exotic Peacock palette. I keep wanting to call it Electric Peacock. I don't know what an Electric Peacock would look like. But yeah, so I think if it was just a smidge deeper, it would look a little bit closer to the actual shade. But again, I think it's close enough. The next shade is from ColourPop Blue Moon, and it is this shade Tide Pool right here. So it's this like really vibrant aqua blue shade, and it does have a lot of shimmer to it. I think it is very, very close to the color in the actual palette itself. This was definitely one of the harder ones to actually pick out because it is, blues can be so different. Like, you don't get as much variation with like yellow, but for blues they go in so many different directions with so much or so little depth that it's very hard to find exact matches. If you don't believe me, go to a clothing store, pick up 2 different brands of clothing that are both blue, and see how hard it is to match. Even the navy colored clothes will not be exactly the same navy color. So yeah, the Blue Moon color I think works perfectly in this situation. The next one is this sort of grungy gold color, which again I was kind of like, ooh, I don't know where I'm pulling that from. But I did find the Profusion Emeralds palette, this shade Burst down here. It has just enough of that like grungy tarnish kind of look to it. You can see I've been swatching all day. It has just enough of that like tarnished kind of look to it that I thought that that would be sufficient. Now the one in the actual palette I think goes a little bit more in that like tarnished grungy direction, but I think this is close enough that you could pull off a look with it. Okay, we're into the second row. This is so exciting. So the second row, the first shade is called Sultry, and again I went back into this Ruby May palette and I pulled this shade Indica. So it's like a little bit more shimmery than I think is in the Pinky Rose palette, but it definitely captures that sort of like magenta quality that the Pinky Rose palette exemplifies. So I think even though the finish is a little bit different for this one, it still gives you a very similar color. Okay, the next one, Discreet. This one was pretty tricky too, actually. I ended up swatching a lot of greens in my collection to try to find the perfect one, and I settled on the Just My Luck palette from ColourPop and this bottom shade Act Natural. This shade has just enough of like a deep cool tone green to make it match up with what's in the Pinky Rose palette. The trouble I was running across is that while the colors typically look pigmented in the actual pans, by the time you swatch them out they looked a little bit lighter than what the Pinky Rose shade did. So this one I think came the closest. Okay, so the next one is Risque. This shade is definitely on the yellow side, so I wanted to find something that was going to kind of run in that same vein. And I think the closest that I was able to get was this shade from the Honey palette, and it's called Oh Behave. Although the shade Buzzkill, which is just to the side of it here, I think the two of them mixed together would be actually the perfect match for the shade in the Pinky Rose palette, because I could not find a shade in my collection that was like a near perfect representation for that shade in Pinky Rose. Okay, so the next shade is Lovesick, and for this one I went with, again, the Zulu palette, and I went with this shade over here. This one I think runs a little bit more like green than the Pinky Rose shade. The Pinky Rose shade is definitely more of like a minty aqua matte shade, and I really didn't have anything between the ColourPop Mint to Be palette, the other ColourPop Just My Luck palette, and all of the other palettes that I have that have like pops of green here and there. I didn't have one that really was that like bright, vibrant, matte aqua shade. So this is as close as I could get, but it definitely runs a little bit more green than what the actual palette has. The next one is Lustful, and again I went into the Zulu palette and I went with this purple shade down here. Again, I think the one in the Pinky Rose palette is a little bit like a smokier, deeper purple, but this was the most vibrant purple that I could find that really mimicked that. Now the other one that I have that's similar would be in the Ruby May Cosmetics. This Blackberry shade is a very, very deep, vibrant, smoked out kind of purple shade. It's running a little blue on camera, but it is very purple in person. However, I think the Pinky Rose shade appears to be matte, so this one being a metallic, I thought the finish was just too off. By the time you actually swatched it out, the shimmer or the reflectiveness of this shade was too much to make it similar enough for me to say those were the same. So I went with the Zulu one, but again, if you have this one, you could use either. Next one is the shade Provocative, and for this one I went in with the Magic Mini by Juvia's, and I went with this shade down here, Buzzo, B-U-Z-O, Buzu, Buzzo, I don't know, I'm terrible at names. So yeah, this one is like a nice, vibrant, bright, kind of Kelly green with a lot of reflect. I felt like it was really, really similar to the shade from the Pinky Rose palette, so I felt like those were pretty close dupes of one another. And the last shade. The last shade is the shade Dreams. And again, this is the same problem I had with the other blues. Blues are hugely varied from palette to palette, from producer to producer, and so this one was really hard. It's definitely a very, very smoky kind of dark blue. So the closest that I could get was the ColourPop Blue Moon palette again, and it's this shade Clued In. And it's just this really like deep smoky blue. It looks a little more navy in the palette, but when you smoke it out, it actually looks very, very dark. So I think that would be great for like an outer crease color. I think it looks really similar to the Pinky Rose palette, but it's not quite exactly the same. The other option that you would have would be the last shade in the Snow Angels palette, the one down here, just because it's so, so deep and rich that I think it could pull off that look. And one more that I think would also work, actually technically, yeah, it's Yehide. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this is the Magic Mini again, and it's this bottom right, you're right, color here that could potentially pull off that same type of look as well. So now what I'm going to do is insert my swatches compared to a set of swatches that I pulled from somebody who appears to have a pretty similar skin tone as mine, so that you can do comparisons to see how well I did. And I think in general I did pretty well. I think I got pretty close. I'm happy with the result. I definitely think I could make a fun look out of this, and I don't know that I would have necessarily pulled any of these palettes and put them together the way that this came together. So I'm happy with what I was able to make. It saves me $24.99. Leave me a comment down below. Did you think the shades came close? Do you think they kind of missed the mark a little bit? Have you tried anything from Pinky Rose before? I'd be really excited to hear about it, because again, that palette is gorgeous. There's no predicting whether or not I'm actually going to pick it up at some point in the future. And spoiler alert, I probably will, because I'm a makeup addict. But yeah, let me know down in the comments below what your thoughts were on this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. Feel free to like and subscribe if you have not already, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye!